What happens when a quiet teenager in a perfect town crosses paths with the wrong cop? One moment of prejudice unleashes a chain reaction no one saw coming. Secrets, silent power, and a takedown that shook the entire town. Buckle up. This is Brookside Hollow like you've never seen it before. The clock on the dashboard flipped to 3:47 p.m. just as Officer Kyle Sutter spotted a black teenager walking alone down Maplewood Drive, a street where white fences and perfectly trimmed lawns were the unspoken law of Brookside Hollow. In Kyle's eyes, the boy became suspicious simply for existing there. Suspicion didn't need a reason. And in that moment, Kyle Sutter, his uniform still crisp, his unchecked pride swelling beneath it, decided to turn an ordinary afternoon into a lesson the boy wouldn't soon forget. Caleb Morgan, 16 years old, heard the soft hiss of tires on asphalt before he even saw the cruiser tailing him. He tightened the strap of his backpack across his shoulder, the music in his earbuds fading as he pulled one out. The familiar silhouettes of neighborhood houses blurred past, but Caleb knew he was no longer invisible. In Brookside Hollow, a black boy never truly blended into the scenery. The patrol car crept along the curb. The window rolled down, revealing Officer Sutter's face, his cold stare sweeping over Caleb like a searchlight pinning a stray prey. "Hey you, stop for a second." The officer's voice rang out, dragging the words slowly like a summons. Caleb stopped walking, removed his other earbud, and swallowed the tension rising in his throat. His father, Samuel Morgan, had taught him, if you get stopped, stay calm. Be polite. Don't give them a reason. "Yes, sir," Caleb replied, his voice steadier than the frantic beat of his heart. Sutter stepped out of the car, his movements exaggerated, as if he were hunting a thief. His face carried an unsettling eagerness, a dangerous blend of authority and prejudice. "What are you doing around here?" Sutter asked, his eyes scanning Caleb from head to toe like he was inspecting contraband. "I live here, sir. Just walking home from school. Got ID." Sutter narrowed his eyes. Caleb hesitated, slowly removing his backpack. "I'm only 16. I just have my school ID. Keep your hands where I can see them." Sutter barked, his hand already grazing the holster at his hip. Caleb froze. He raised both empty hands in front of him, a gesture both humiliating and heartbreakingly familiar. The air between them tightened. There were no birds singing, no usual neighborhood chatter, only the suffocating presence of suspicion and the terrifying silence before the storm. The encounter with Officer Kyle Sutter should have ended as nothing more than a typical annoyance, a routine ID check and a wave-off. But it was Sutter's mocking laughter when Caleb mentioned his father that unwittingly set off a chain of events he could never have imagined. "Special Forces? Huh?" He sneered, loud enough for the neighbors nearby to hear. "What is this, G.I. Joe? Schoolyard edition?" Caleb didn't respond. He simply lowered his head, picked up his backpack, and only moved when Sutter finally waved him off with a dismissive flick of the hand. But behind that smug smirk, Officer Sutter had planted an itch in his own mind, a nagging question he couldn't shake. A 16-year-old black kid, living in Brookside Hollow, casually throwing around the words, "Special Forces?" No way. That evening, in his cramped rented apartment, Kyle Sutter gnawed on a cold sandwich, his hand scrolling through his battered old laptop, digging for any scrap of information on the Morgan family. Danielle Morgan, Caleb's mother, popped up first. Hospital administrator, clean record. Caleb, high school student, good grades, no disciplinary issues. But when he tried searching for Samuel Morgan, Caleb's father, everything came to a screeching halt. A bright red notification flashed across the screen, access denied. Clearance level required. Sutter frowned. Tried again and again. Same result every time. Instead of a standard background profile, every search on Samuel Morgan returned only stark black letters on a white screen. The classic sign of top-secret military files. A chill ran down Kyle Sutter's spine. The man he had mocked, the man he had so easily dismissed as a phony, cast a long shadow over Brookside Hollow. A phantom none of the suburbanites had ever truly seen. 3 days later, when black SUVs began quietly appearing around town, No sirens, no flashing lights, but exuding an unmistakable air of menace. Kyle realized he had accidentally triggered a game far bigger than anything he was used to playing. While Sutter fumbled through encrypted files, a silent alert was triggered hundreds of miles away at a defense intelligence center. A simple message was transmitted. Unusual activity detected around Morgan asset. Priority alert level 2. Initiate passive surveillance. Samuel Morgan, the man who kept to the shadows, mentioned by few and known by even fewer, had been alerted. And Brookside Hollow, though still blissfully unaware, was about to face the darkest summer it had ever known. These days, Brookside Hollow still wore its perfect facade, neatly trimmed lawns, gleaming windows, gleaming SUVs parked tidily along Maplewood Drive. But beneath that polished surface, tension was leaking like gas into a sealed room. Officer Kyle Sutter was becoming increasingly obsessed. No records, no photos, no exposed weaknesses. Samuel Morgan moved like a walking ghost. Every time Sutter stared into his computer screen, those blank, blacked-out documents mocked him, fueling a sick hunger to find something. At first, he just circled the Morgan home in his cruiser, pretending to patrol, pretending to conduct security checks. But soon, just looking wasn't enough. One night, as darkness swallowed Maplewood Drive and the streetlights flickered into faint halos, Sutter decided to act. He quietly parked his cruiser at the end of the street, cut the headlights, and pulled his cap low. His uniform was replaced with jeans and a black jacket. He crept around to the backyard of the Morgan home, where an old wooden shed sat tucked beneath the shadow of a maple tree. The padlock on the shed door was a standard model, hardly enough to stop someone with experience. A few seconds and a bent hairpin later, the wooden door creaked open, revealing a neat, orderly space inside. A lawn mower, garden tools, a few bins of household supplies. Nothing unusual. No weapons cache, no classified documents like Sutter's imagination had conjured. But as he quietly rifled through the high shelves, a small, weathered metal box caught his eye. It wasn't locked, just a simple snap of the latch. Inside were a few sheets of foreign currency, a small notebook filled with strange symbols, and a photograph. Samuel Morgan, looking younger, clad in desert fatigues with no visible insignia, standing beside 3 other men. Their faces were mostly obscured by shadows, but Samuel's eyes, sharp, alert, dangerous, were the one thing in the photo that stood out. Sutter quickly snapped photos with his phone, trying to keep his hands from shaking. He returned everything carefully, closed the box, relocked the shed door, and slipped back into the night as if nothing had happened. Back inside his cruiser, Sutter stared at the image glowing on his phone screen. One thought gnawed at him. You just touched something you were never meant to. But instead of retreating, a twisted knot of pride and fear drove Officer Kyle Sutter to do the worst thing possible: dig deeper. 3 days after the break-in at the Morgan shed, Kayla Morgan was standing at the checkout counter at Hayes General Store, a cold bottle of Gatorade in his hand, when the familiar shadow of Officer Kyle Sutter appeared again. This time without the uniform, just a disheveled leather jacket and a face etched with defeat. Caleb caught sight of him in the security mirror above the counter. A part of him wanted to walk out immediately, but his father had taught him. Sometimes silence is stronger than 1,000 protests. Sutter sauntered over, standing next to him as if by chance. "Well, if it isn't Special Forces Junior," Sutter said loudly enough for several customers to turn and look. Caleb gripped the bottle tightly, suppressing the urge to snap back. He stared straight ahead, set the Gatorade down, and quietly reached for his wallet. Sutter didn't back off. He leaned his elbow casually on the counter, staring at Caleb with a contemptuous smirk. "Your daddy must be Superman, huh? Or just another guy spinning tall tales to cover up bailing on his family." A brief silence fell. Even Mr. Franklin Hayes, the store owner who usually avoided any kind of trouble, looked up from his register. Caleb took a deep breath. He turned to face Sutter, meeting his goading eyes head-on. But instead of lashing out, Caleb replied in a voice so calm it was almost startling. "A real man doesn't need to brag about the things he sacrificed." Sutter flinched. Just for a second, just a flicker, but it was enough. Caleb saw it, the flash of confusion in Sutter's eyes, and he realized he had already won, without raising his voice or lifting a finger. Sierra Lewis, a classmate Caleb had once thought barely noticed him, stood tucked near the snack aisle, quietly recording the entire exchange on her phone. Caleb slipped the receipt into his pocket, grabbed his bottle, and walked away, leaving Sutter frozen at the counter, trapped in the heavy, silent judgment of the entire store. In Brookside Hollow, silence carried louder than any shout. As Caleb pushed the door open, he caught a small, deliberate nod from Mr. Hayes, a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. He didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but there was one thing Caleb was sure of. He would walk forward with his head held high, just as Samuel Morgan had taught him from the very beginning. 2 days after the cold showdown at Hayes General Store, Caleb Morgan thought he had weathered the storm. He returned to his usual routine. Morning math classes, cold chicken sandwiches at the Brookside High cafeteria, and afternoons kicking a soccer ball around with friends behind the school. But the storm hadn't passed. It was merely compressing itself, waiting for the moment to explode. It happened during Thursday lunch, when Caleb was sitting at his usual table and Officer Kyle Sutter, no longer in uniform, no longer with any authority, marched straight into the cafeteria. His presence, grim and crackling with danger, sucked the noise out of the buzzing room in a single heartbeat. Several supervising teachers jerked upright, exchanging panicked glances. A few students shot to their feet, whispering in alarm. Sierra Lewis, ever alert, immediately pulled out her phone. Sutter didn't hesitate. He strode straight toward Caleb, his eyes blazing. "Caleb Morgan," he barked, his voice cutting through the cafeteria. "You are under arrest for obstruction of justice and aiding unlawful activity." Caleb set down his sandwich, rose slowly to his feet, never taking his eyes off Sutter. A thick, choking silence settled over the room. "For what?" Caleb asked, his voice steady, the shock tightening his throat. "Cut the act," Sutter snarled, grabbing the boy's arm and wrenching it behind his back, snapping a pair of handcuffs on him in full view of the horrified school. "He didn't do anything," a classmate shouted. "Let him go." Others cried out, voices rising in outrage. The principal, finally grasping what was happening, rushed over, his face blazing red. "Officer Sutter, you have no authority here. Release the student immediately." Sutter ignored him. He shoved Caleb forward, marching him through the stunned crowd, parading him down the hallway like a trophy. Sierra kept live streaming every 10th second, her phone unwavering. The large glass doors slammed open, a blast of icy air hitting Caleb's face. He was pushed towards Sutter's unmarked black civilian car. A few braver students had begun following, phones raised high, capturing everything. Within 5 minutes, Brookside Hollow's social media erupted. The video Sierra recorded racked up 500 shares within the first hour, with a blaring headline: "Former cop illegally arrests student at Brookside High." Local reporters, sniffing out a red-hot story like bloodhounds, sprang into action. And as Sutter smugly drove away from the school parking lot, he didn't yet realize he had just thrown himself headfirst into the center of the storm. A storm no one, not even Brookside Hollow, could control. News of Caleb Morgan's unlawful arrest spread beyond Brookside Hollow's borders in a matter of hours. Within 2 hours, television vans bearing local news logos crowded around the school grounds, their antennas rising like spears into the sky. At the town's police station, Sutter had just dragged Caleb, still handcuffed, through the front lobby when the door behind him swung open. Samuel Morgan was already standing there. No shouting, no posturing, just presence. And in that silence, the air grew thick, as if someone had sucked all the oxygen from the room. He wore a dark blue shirt, plain jeans, and scuffed leather boots. But what truly froze every gaze on him was the way he stood, upright, relaxed, yet radiating a quiet power, as if the entire room had shifted off-center around his presence. "Release the boy," Samuel said, his voice low and calm. Sutter scoffed, trying to summon the last scraps of his bravado. "Who do you think you are, giving orders here?" Samuel stepped forward, his voice sharpening to cold-forged steel. "I don't think. I know." A flicker of hesitation crossed Sutter's face, but he tried to hold his ground. "I have the authority to detain him under suspicion." "No," Samuel cut him off, pulling from his jacket pocket a military identification badge. Red background, silver trim. The kind of ID anyone who'd ever worked in security would recognize and fear. A high-ranking officer. Someone you didn't touch unless you were ready to see your career go up in smoke. Sergeant Victor Hayes, the shift supervisor on duty, recognized it instantly. His face paled, and he hurried over. "Mr. Morgan," Hayes said quietly, bowing his head slightly. "We'll take care of this immediately." Samuel didn't respond. He simply locked eyes with Sutter, a look that stripped him bare under an invisible microscope. "Release Caleb. Now," Hayes commanded. Shoved aside, Sutter reluctantly unlocked the handcuffs. Caleb rubbed his wrists, stealing a brief glance at his father, a look that said everything. "I understand." Samuel stepped forward, resting a light hand on Caleb's shoulder. A simple, quiet gesture, yet it struck harder than any fiery speech. "Arrogance," Samuel said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "without true ability, only leads to ruin." No one dared respond. As the Morgans walked out of the police station, the entire town of Brookside Hollow, and especially those who thought they held power, finally understood. This battle was only just beginning. After the incident at the police station, Kyle Sutter had nothing left to lose. He was suspended indefinitely, stripped bare by the local media as nothing more than a failed clown. In the eyes of Brookside Hollow, he was now just a petty, bitter bigot, lashing out because of his own impotence. But in Sutter's mind, he was still convinced Samuel Morgan was hiding something dark. And if he couldn't expose it through legal means, then he would do it his way. That night, under a slate-gray sky heavy with the smell of impending rain, Sutter gathered 3 of his old allies, disgraced former cops, just desperate enough to be reckless. They dressed in dark clothes, wore gloves, and packed lock-breaking tools along with a few self-defense weapons. The plan was simple: break into the Morgan home, find evidence, anything, and blast it all over social media before anyone could silence them. But as they vaulted the backyard fence, things immediately felt off. The back gate, usually locked tight, was swinging wide open. The house was dark, except for a faint glow spilling from an upstairs window, as if the occupants were fast asleep. A perfect silence, too perfect. Sutter signaled for the group to split up and move carefully. The living room was neat, untouched. The kitchen empty. The office door was locked, but it took less than a minute to break the latch. The moment the door swung open, they all froze. In the middle of the small room sat a wooden table, but there were no weapons, no secret documents, only a laptop, open and humming softly, its screen flashing a message in bright red letters. "Recording in progress. Please smile." Before Sutter could even curse, alarms blared from every direction. Floodlights snapped on across the yard, bathing every stunned face in blinding white. From the corner of the house, a projection screen lit up, playing back hidden camera footage. The group scaling the fence, breaking locks, ransacking rooms. Incriminating evidence, captured without missing a single second. The front door swung open. Samuel Morgan stood there, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Behind him, 3 federal agents in black suits calmly stepped inside. "Perfect," Samuel said lightly, almost conversational. "You just helped me complete the criminal file." One of the agents pulled out a set of handcuffs and moved forward. Sutter, his face ghost white, still tried to fight back. You set me up." "No," Samuel corrected him, his voice cold as ice. "You dug your own grave. I just posted the warning signs." As they were restrained, Caleb stood quietly behind the door, watching. He understood. This wasn't just his father's victory. It was his first real lesson in how true power worked. Quiet, precise, and without violence. After the humiliating defeat at the Morgan house, Kyle Sutter should have disappeared for Brookside Hollow like a beaten man. But shame and his obsession with Samuel Morgan ignited a blind fury inside him. On Monday morning, while Caleb was playing basketball with friends at Willow Creek Park, Sutter showed up. No sirens, no police badges, just an unmarked black truck and a handgun tucked under his jacket. No one had time to react when he rushed forward, grabbing Caleb. "You're coming with me," Sutter snarled, dragging the boy backward toward the truck. The kid's screams echoed across the park. One quick-thinking boy live-streamed the entire scene, his phone trembling in his hand. Caleb didn't fight. He didn't scream. He remembered his father's words. "When you face a wild beast, calm is your only weapon." But Sutter didn't know. From the moment he laid hands on Caleb, the smartwatch on Caleb's wrist had already triggered emergency mode. Less than 3 minutes later, Samuel Morgan appeared. He didn't need flashing lights or a megaphone, only his calm stride and eyes that seemed to cut through the mist. In the middle of a packed park, amid cell phone cameras, news crews, and dozens of witnesses, Samuel Morgan walked straight toward the man who had kidnapped his son. Sutter pulled out his gun, his hand trembling. "Stay back. Don't take another step." Samuel said nothing. He didn't even slow down. His gaze locked on his Sutter's like a hunter fixing on prey. A whisper drifted through the crowd. "God, look at the way he moves." When only a few steps separated them, Samuel struck. No one could even see it clearly. Just a blur of motion, fast, decisive, and flawlessly precise. The gun flew from Sutter's hand, and he was slammed down onto the grass in a simple arm lock, rendered completely immobile. The silence exploded into thunderous applause. Police arrived within 5 minutes, this time for real, and this time to arrest Sutter. No excuses, no escape. As Caleb's restraints were removed, he looked at his father with shining eyes, not just because he was safe, but because he understood something deeper. True power didn't need guns or shouting. It only needed a man willing to walk straight into danger, carrying the weight of a lifetime's strength. And today, all of Brookside Hollow had witnessed it with their own eyes. After the failed kidnapping, broadcast live across every news channel, Brookside Hollow was shaken to its core. Town meetings, once sparsely attended, were now packed with citizens, reporters, and representatives from human rights organizations. The Brookside Police Department was forced to overhaul itself from top to bottom. But for Samuel Morgan, exposing the wrongs wasn't enough. He knew, to create real change, you had to plant the seeds right at the heart of the community. 1 month later, under the sprawling branches of the old oak tree at the center of town, Samuel stood before a newly erected wooden sign, carved with simple words: Morgan Leadership and Self-Defense Academy. It wasn't a flashy martial arts school, nor was it a place for throwing punches or trading kicks. Here, teenagers from all across town would be taught what Samuel had always believed to be fundamental: discipline, dignity, self-defense, not to attack, but to stand tall. On opening day, Caleb stood beside his father, wearing a simple gray t-shirt with a small logo, a hand and a flame, symbolizing quiet strength. Hundreds came. There were familiar faces, some who had once doubted them, some who had once turned away. And there were children, hand in hand with their parents, eyes wide with excitement as they glimpsed a new kind of role model. Not fists, not handcuffs, but strength from within. Samuel didn't give a long speech. He simply told a story. Back in the places I once served, we weren't taught to defeat enemies with bullets. We were taught to defeat ourselves, our anger, our fear, our despair. Here, I want to teach you the same thing. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was steady and true. Caleb trained right alongside the others, no special treatment. He sweated through the same tough morning drills under the blazing sun, and learned to control his reactions instead of his impulses during the long evening lessons. And little by little, something miraculous began to take root. The teenagers once labeled troublemakers now stood tall, greeting others respectfully. Parents who had one-sided the Morgan family with suspicion now approached them, even asking for advice. Brookside Hollow didn't change overnight, but every bowed head, every bead of sweat fallen onto the training ground, every spark of newfound pride in a student's eyes. All of it was adding up, building something new. In the small room beneath the academy's sign, Samuel hung a single quote. Courage isn't shouting on a battlefield. Courage is taking the next step when the whole world turns its back on you. And for the first time in generations, Brookside Hollow was learning how to take that step. One late afternoon, as the sun tilted low over the peaceful rooftops of Brookside Hollow, the Morgan family gathered together on the back porch. A simple dinner: grilled chicken, sweet corn, and iced lemonade. But for Caleb, Samuel, and Danielle, nothing was more precious than this moment. Peaceful, whole, after the storms they had weathered. Caleb laughed as he recounted stories from training at the academy, where he had now become an unofficial assistant instructor, teaching the younger kids how to stay balanced, both on the mats and in life. Samuel listened quietly, pride flickering in his eyes, as if every word from his son was a new heartbeat inside a heart once hardened by the world. In that moment, Danielle squeezed Samuel's hand beneath the table. "We've built something, haven't we?" she whispered. Samuel nodded, his gaze drifting far beyond the treetops. Where darkness once lurked, now small points of light had begun to bloom, and each day they grew a little brighter. But Samuel also knew true peace was never just luck. It was the product of silent vigilance, guarded by those the world never saw. And indeed, in the forest skirting town, in the quiet corners of cozy cafes, familiar ghosts still lingered. Samuel's old comrades, those who had once faced life and death by his side, continued to watch from afar, never disturbing the hard-won peace of the Morgan family, but ready to step in at a moment's notice. They were a silent promise, never spoken aloud. As long as you need us, you will never fight alone. That night, as Brookside Hollow drifted into slumber, Caleb went outside to shoot a few basketballs before bed. His first shot hit the backboard and bounced away. He retrieved the ball, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and threw again. This time, the ball sailed cleanly through the night air, kissed the rim, and dropped straight through the net. A perfect shot. Samuel stood leaning against the doorframe, quietly watching his son. Without needing words, he knew Caleb had grown, not just in strength, but in perseverance, character, and dignity. The scars the Morgan family bore, both visible and unseen, would always be part of their story. But those scars also reminded them true strength wasn't about avoiding the darkness. It was about standing firm when the darkness came. Beneath the starry sky of Brookside Hollow, where light and shadow would forever intertwine, a new future had begun. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and this time, they would never have to face it alone again.